Greetings. My name is Sean Jones, and I work at Los Alamos National Laboratory's Research Library with Valentina Nevlet-Jones and Martin Klein. I'm also a member of the Web Science and Digital Libraries Research Group at Old Dominion University with Michelle Weigel and Michael Nelson. And today I'm going to talk about It's All About the Cards. Sharing on social media encouraged HTML metadata growth. Metadata is key to organizing content and providing context. Creating metadata takes time and effort. As we see here, web page authors can add metadata to their pages using HTML's meta element. And web page authors have many choices in metadata standards, things like schema.org or the Open Graph Protocol or Dublin Core. And Twitter, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and Pinterest, and even Apple have their own standards for metadata for different purposes. And even the HTML standard itself suggests some metadata that you might want to include in your page. But creating metadata is expensive. And so how do authors spend their metadata budget? Past studies focused on Dublin Core and show that systems favor certain fields. So as we looked at various studies, and we found that title is the most popular field per 10 studies. And description is the second most popular field per 6 studies. And there's variation in the other fields that people tend to prefer. Now, our study evaluates the evolution of metadata usage over time. Web archives capture web pages, HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and embedded content as mementos, so we can see exactly what the code looked like at a particular date in the past. And thus, each memento captured at a particular date and time, its memento date time. Each memento represents an author's behavior at that particular time, and thus we can perform this analysis. And we thank Max Grusky for access to the Newsroom dataset. Newsroom contains 1.3 million mementos of news articles that contain metadata. And all the articles contain at least an HTML description field. Newsroom's mementos were captured by the Internet Archive between 1998 and 2016. And thus our data is kind of limited to that particular period of time. And so in order to balance out the years, or try to balance out the years with the actual sources that are present in the data set, we sampled 277,000 mementos of news articles from the 39 outlets found in Newsroom, from places like Fox News or Forbes or Time, and also British publications like The Telegraph. And so we have a variety of different sources, and we can look at different behaviors. In 1998, the mean number of metadata fields in use was 2. By 2016, it had grown to 39. And if we look at each individual metadata field, we could ask, how are they being used? And so we grouped metadata fields into categories. And on this stream graph, we can see that a category size indicates the percentage of articles that contain at least one metadata field from this category. And we could tell that metadata usage exploded after 2008. And now the playing field is full of things like Twitter cards and Open Graph Protocol, Facebook tracking. Dublin Core is still in there. But there's also growth for things like schema.org and other metadata fields. And then we evaluated the use of the fields specified in HTML standards from HTML 2.0 to HTML5. And we found that keywords are still in use, even though most search engines do not process them. And it looks like author usage is on the rise. And the heavy use of description, though, is an artifact of this particular data set because there was a requirement for the item to be in the data set. To contrast with previous studies, we analyzed the adoption of Dublin Core, but unfortunately, we found that Dublin Core's usage really hasn't grown much. It seems to only be used by BBC and Fox News during this time period. And schema.org is designed to assist search engines. So you would think that these particular authors of these news articles would be very interested in helping to find their articles via schema.org. And SEO, search engine optimization experts, implied that placement among search results is improved for pages that use schema.org. But still, these lines don't grow very much. And other search engine metadata usage has not grown much either. We see very similar usage for metadata related to Bing or Google search. And so where are the authors spending their metadata time? Metadata that supports sharing on social media has experienced a renaissance. Social cards are summaries of web pages shared on social media, and they're built from authors' web page metadata. So for this particular tweet that I show here from Vice President Kamala Harris, the author of this NBC News article inserted a metadata field, Twitter:image. And in that field, they specified the striking image for this particular card. And they specified Twitter:title. And in that field, they specified the title that would appear on this card. And the same thing for Twitter:description, which indicates what description should show up when someone like Kamala Harris shares this particular article. And Facebook has its own standard called Open Graph Protocol, shortened to OGP. And usage of OGP fields for social cards has skyrocketed since it was introduced in 2010. These are all the OGP fields that were present in the data set, in our sample that we analyzed. And those things outlined in red are those associated with social cards. Those items that are outlined in dotted red are indicated to be required to create a card by the documentation, but during our testing, we found out that they're not necessarily needed. But there's been far less growth for fields that are not related to social cards because Open Graph Protocol is about more than just creating cards. And the Twitter card standard shows the same meteoric rise in metadata usage specific to social cards. And the growing field usage mirrors the Facebook counterparts for these same fields. And as we did before, we outlined in red the items, the particular fields that are required to create a card on Twitter. And we created dotted lines around the fields that are implied by the documentation to be required. And Twitter will use the Open Graph Protocol fields, but only if Twitter:card is also specified. So if it's not present here, these same pages also have the Open Graph fields. And Facebook supports non-Open Graph Protocol fields as part of its marketing API. But the only field that seems to have experienced growth is FB:"app ID, which is implied by Facebook's sharing debugger to be necessary for a card. But based on our testing, it works fine without it. And many of the articles we reviewed contain a blank string or dummy value for this field. So in conclusion, it's all about the cards. We analyzed 227,724 mementos of news articles to understand how authors spend their metadata budget. In 2008, metadata usage exploded. And when we break down usage by individual fields, we see that authors favor fields associated with social cards. And so we hope this insight can help metadata standard authors understand what spurs metadata adoption. Thank you.